Late antiquity was an age where hard-handed men found themselves set loose in increasing numbers to labour in their mines. Within 2 centuries, the Christian clergy, and to a lesser extent the Jewish rabbinate, had developed systems of religious giving by the faithful, which supported an increasing number of persons who had once been given over to the drudgery of labour and could now commit themselves to labour in their mines. To members of the leisure classes, this was a far from welcome development. A withering scorn for those who made money out of religious enterprises was a characteristic reflex of those lucky few who did not need to make money in the first place. It was taken for granted that many persons embarked on a life of religious entrepreneurship did it simply to escape work. One set oneself up as a sorcerer, as a diviner, as the founder of a new cult, simply as one disreputable expedient among others, by which to slip out from under the harrow of ponos, of labour. To take one notable example, in the mid-2nd century, the pagan philosopher Celsus presented Jesus in just these terms. The son of an unwed mother, Jesus had been forced to live on his wits. Because he was poor, writes Celsus, he hired himself out as a workman in Egypt, and there tried his hand at certain magical powers. He returned full of conceit because of these powers, and on account of them gave himself the title of God. Celsus had seen it all before. Jesus was just one of those who go about begging and saying they're sons of God who have come from above. His disciples were no better, adds Celsus. They were infamous men who had not even a primary education. They moved hither and thither, collecting a means of livelihood in a disgraceful and importunate way. Bluntly, they were in it for the money. Now, we must remember that the spectacular career of Paul had been lived out under the shadow of just such suspicions. A vivid tableau, preserved, carefully presented in the Acts of the Apostles, condensed the issues that had been brought to a head by Paul's activities. In 55 AD, Paul landed at Samos on his way to deliver the funds that he had collected for the church in Jerusalem. He was met at Miletus by the elders of the church of Ephesus. Faced by a potentially hostile group, ever on the alert to resist charismatic freeloaders, the first thing that Paul did was exactly what the relatives of Jesus would do before the emperor Domitian. He showed them his hands. These were the hard hands of a man who, despite his religious calling, had continued to work for a living. Acts 20:33-35. I coveted no man's silver or gold or apparel. These hands ministered to my necessities and to those who were with me. In all things I've shown that by so toiling one must help the weak, remembering the words of the Lord Jesus, how he had said, "It is more blessed to give than to receive." This rare appeal on Paul's part to the direct words of Jesus, indeed to a saying of Jesus that does not appear in any gospel, shows how important it still was in the 1st century AD to steer clear of the taint of having succumbed to the perpetual temptation of former hard-handed men to live as religious leaders off the toil of their supporters. Others would be much less scrupulous than Paul. Writing in about 170 AD, Lucian, the Greek satirist, provides one of our first glimpses into the inner workings of a Christian community. It is not a flattering glimpse. In the middle of the 2nd century, if we are to believe Lucian, the eccentric, cynic philosopher Peregrinus had set himself up for a time among Christians. He became, says Lucian, a prophet, a cult leader, head of the community. He interpreted and explained some of their books and even composed many. As a result, the wily Peregrinus lived in luxury. Even when he was put in prison as a Christian, adds Lucian, he did well. For their first lawgiver, Jesus, persuaded them that they're all brothers one to another. So if any charlatan and trickster comes among them, he quickly acquires sudden wealth by imposing upon simple folk. Altogether, the flamboyant sponger Peregrinus, quite as much as the acutely sensitive fundraiser Paul, were a sign of the future. Money had begun to talk, and in the late 2nd and 3rd centuries it talked ever more insistently about religion. Now, let's end the lecture by seeing what this means. First, what were the efforts on the Christian churches effects on the Christian churches of the continued effort to remember the poor? What is very clear is that Christian charity for the poor meant much more than an occasional gesture of compassion. The manner in which charity was given, and above all the issues raised by its administration, had immediate repercussions on the structure and self-awareness of the Christian community as a whole. So let us look for a moment at Christian charity. Seen from the outside, Christian charity was a starkly counter-cultural activity. It flouted the expectations of a society that thought of itself as being held together by iron laws of reciprocity, where nothing was for nothing. To give money to the poor on a regular basis was to throw money into a social void. The 2nd century dream book of Artemidorus of Daldis made that clear. To dream that one had given money to a beggar was a very bad omen. It foretold death. For death is like a beggar who takes and gives nothing in return. Yet this is precisely what Christians insisted that they should do. To outsiders, this might seem a whimsical waste of good money on persons whose gratitude counted for nothing. But it was hailed by Christians as a moment of supreme freedom. The back of their minds, a crucial link in the fetters of normal society, ruled by relentless calculations of mutual obligation, had been broken by a countercultural act of giving. By an uncalculating act of generosity, they not only relieved the distress of their fellows, they had also created a little utopia for themselves. It was a utopia such as even non-Christian urban sophisticates liked to think about. For example, Dio Chrysostomus, who wrote at the end of the 1st century, imagined that such utopia had survived in among the farmers of the old world rural Greece. The counterculture, their spontaneous generosity to passing strangers greatly impressed him. As Dio pointed out, unlike the gifts of the rich, these open-hearted offerings of food and shelter do not look for gifts in return. They were gifts that were not offered with the expectation of return, such as all too easily made ordinary persons subject to the rich as debtors and clients. They were pure gifts, such as expected no repayment. We should note that in Christian and Jewish circles, the gift of alms did not happen entirely without a return, but it was a deliberately inverted return. The solid gift of the hand was met by the ethereal, and for that reason superior and incalculable, gift of the mouth, by intercessory prayer for the rich, offered to God by the poor. The charged imaginative logic which accompanied the joining of incommensurables, of earthly treasure to heaven, of rich to poor, ensured that the return of the mouth through intercessory prayer was a weight-free exchange, was not accompanied by the acute sense of having entered into a relation of personal dependence, which the patronage systems current in the Greco-Roman world had usually forced upon the poor. If the poor felt gratitude, it was not to be felt towards the individual rich donor. The sense of gratitude and of obligation was to be directed only towards God and to his church. The countercultural implications of Christian giving to the poor have recently been brought into sharp focus by Seth Schwartz in his very perceptive study of Judaism at this time. His book, Were the Jews a Mediterranean Society? Reciprocity and Solidarity in Ancient Judaism. This incisive book shows that the Jews also were in the process of creating, in their own way, a Mediterranean counterculture that was quite as distinctive as that of the Christians. Schwartz's insights are particularly welcome because the Christian communities of the 2nd and 3rd centuries frequently looked directly to their Jewish neighbors or shared their concerns at one remove through the study of scriptures which they held in common with the Jews. The Jews created their countercultural community very much as the Christians did. They went out of their way to ensure that gifts to the poor and to the priests did not carry the sinister weight of obligation associated with normal gift giving. As interpreted by the newly emergent rabbinic scholars of the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th centuries, as Schwartz says, I cite, the Bible's elaborate rules were meant to ensure that the charitable donation, and likewise the donations meant to form the livelihood of the priestly and Levitical temple staff, never degenerated into the dependency-creating gift. The rabbis practiced with particular fierceness the countercultural rejection of the gift. They were expected to treat rich donors in particular with calculated brusqueness, for they knew how easily links of dependence could form around them. For when the rich man benefits the rabbi becomes like clay.